and we appreciate it. We also have on the line David Keene this morning. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Morning. How are you?
Well, we're doing well, and I think I just picked up George at the same time. But
you got me.
Hey, sir. Good to hear from you. National Rifle Association president, as well as American Conservative Union chairman, author, and campaigns on many presidents with David Keene.
Editorial, Washington Times.
Yep. And
what happens when you're old enough and can't hold it down?
Now, let me give you the thing on this white nationalist. It's a term that they came up with because originally it was white supremacists, and that was too far away. So they had to go to white nationalists to try to tar the president with nationalism. Somebody who was around for years and years in the public eye gave incredible amounts of money to every black cause in New York that there was. You've got pictures of Jesse Jackson, Sharpton. Heck, he got the Ellis Island Award with Muhammad Ali and Rosa Parks. Never was called a racist until he ran for president. He went against the establishment. So this is, anything to tar the two together. And this whole thing on the Coast Guard guy, at least they caught him ahead of time. They, the guy at Fort Hood, they kept promoting and moving around, who was a Muslim who was talking directly with the guy, one of the big imams who was behind the bombing of the tower the first time. So the World Trade Towers.
Makes me wonder what took him so long, though. But I'm sure, David Keene, you already started writing about the 2020 election coming up. It's going to be interesting and nothing else because I think we're going to see a real difference between the left and the right. It seems to be real extremes.
Well, that's exactly right. And, of course, the two parties, if you will, have been moving further and further apart in the last decade or so. The Democratic Party of today is not the Democratic Party of 10, 20, or 30 years ago. And the Republican Party, too, has become more homogeneously conservative. So presidential races have tended to really pit very different views of what this country should be all about and give the voters a chance to make a choice. Now, they don't always vote on that choice. Personalities, all of the various things that go into making a voter's decision on Election Day come into play. But this race looks like it's going to be perhaps unique in modern times as a stark contest between two very, very different views of the world and views of what this country ought to be like.
Did it surprise you when someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez comes up? She seems to be leading the Democrat Party right now with the Green New Deal, and she's got more seasoned politicians joining her.
Well, you've got two things. One, you've got the advent of sort of social media flash mobs and social media explosions of personality, and she and the people around her are really adept at putting her in front of the activists on a 24/7 basis. So she's much more visible than say an analogous crazy congressperson of 10 years would be. So that's one aspect. Secondly, the base of the Democratic Party has moved further and further and further to the left. And when someone like her gets visibility and then proposes something that any rational politician 5 years ago even would have rejected as crazy, it gets attention because the voters down there say, hey, that's a good idea. And so you've got people who consider themselves serious candidates for the presidency endorsing ideas that make no sense at all, so that you get into a situation where she comes up with this Green New Deal and gets Senator Markey in the Senate to co-sponsor it on that side. So the Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, says, fine, let's vote on it. And Markey says, oh, well, we can't do that because this isn't really a bill. It's just sort of an aspirational statement of the kind of world we'd like to live in, a world where people don't eat meat, where cows are gone, where you take a train to Europe, and all of these sorts of things. These are crazy ideas that come out of a sophomoric mind and would not have been taken seriously except in the context of the kind of world we live in right now.
Well, one of the things you also have about Cortez is you got to realize you've got a real neophyte who won 4% of the vote in the primary, and she won it the way that you and I were talking about. In the, they had the Justice League go door to door. The incumbent did Eric Cantor and didn't even show up into his district. Now she's gone.
Right. Oftentimes in these kinds of races, the incumbent, the longtime incumbent, is the kind of candidate you want to run against if you're an upstart, because often these folks that are have had 6, 7 terms in Congress, they've really only run one race, and that's their first one. And after that, they sort of sit back on their laurels and get reelected, and are not prepared for the kind of challenge that somebody can mount in today's world. And that's what's happened to both parties.
That's also one of the things you can also already see. She's moving money from constituent services. She's doesn't even have an office open yet, to Washington, D.C. to hire salaries to her people. Usually wait till you're a chairman to do that.
And for example. But she is not the problem. She's a symptom of the problem. And the problem is that the kinds of ideas that she is advancing find fertile ground with supposedly more serious people within her own party. That's a bad sign for their party, and it's a bad sign for the country. I'm sure that, for example, that President Trump would love to run against Bernie Sanders or somebody that was really so far out that he couldn't lose. I remember back when I was in the White House during the Nixon years how they really wanted George McGovern to get the nomination of the Democratic Party, and he did, and of course they were right. He was a very weak candidate. But the fact is that in presidential politics, because of all the factors that come in and all of the things that you can't control, it's a little bit like the NFL. Any team can beat any other team on a given Sunday. And when you get a contest in which you've got people that are so starkly different, and everybody enters the contest saying, well, Bernie can't win this thing, and then something untoward happens and Bernie wins, and then you're in the soup. So it's bad for the Democratic Party, it's bad for the system, it's ultimately bad for the country.
How many Democrats do you think we're going to see in this field by the time it rounds out?
I couldn't
it's a caravan. It's like the thing coming up from Central America
in 2016. So now, I mean, partly it's a result of the fact that this is also symptomatic, not just of the generational change in the Democratic Party, not just in the sense that people who think they have sort of unique ways of getting into the mix are thinking about running, but it's also a symptom of the fact that Democrats really believe that whoever gets nominated is going to be able to beat Donald Trump.
Yep.
And to the extent that they believe that, they all want a shot at it, because they think no matter how off the wall their ideas might seem under other circumstances, or no matter how long a shot they would have under normal circumstances, that they're going to face a president who the public is salivating at the chance of defeating. And so because they believe that, whether it's real or not is not relevant from their standpoint, because they believe it, they all want in, because they all figure they've gotten a shot that they may never have again of achieving the White House.
They do solidly believe. I watched a little bit of the programming this Sunday, and they are convinced that Russia was involved, convinced that Trump did something. Even if Mueller doesn't find it, they'll find it because they know it's there. And it kind of is mind-boggling to me. I mean, they've got to know that if there was something, it would have been found by now.
One would think, but conspiracy theorists are wonderful people, because once you buy into a theory, a conspiracy theory, then everything makes sense. No matter what you say, what the other person says, what fits into the theory. Let me give you an example. One of the charges that came out of the Fusion GPS stuff was the charge that the NRA was funded by the Russians. You'll remember that charge.
Yeah.
So at the very beginning, it was charged that I was the guy who went to Russia, got $30 million from the Russians and gave it to the NRA. NRA with no commission, mind you. And the young reporter who did this, I didn't talk to him, but a friend of mine did, and my friend said, this doesn't make any sense, because you say this happened in mid-2015, and I don't think anybody, including Donald Trump, thought he was going to be president in 2015. And besides which, Dave was for Scott Walker. And the reporter just looked at him and said, perfect cover for a Russian agent.
Oh, really?
I said, that is so beautiful. Because the fact is that once you assume that A is doing something, and he's doing it secretly, no matter what A says, no matter what he does, no matter what the circumstances are, no matter what is shown as evidence, you say, well, that's just a cover-up. So when these people look at these people who are convinced, first of all, that they could not, that their candidate could not have lost the free and fair election.
Right.
The conclusion, therefore, is she didn't lose a free and fair election. Somehow it was stolen from her. Somehow Donald Trump got to be president by unethical and illegal means. And then they convinced themselves that, aha, it was a collusion thing with the Russians, and the Russians made him president. Once you accept that, then everything else makes sense. So that if you have, for example, they spent a year chasing a phone call that Donald Trump Jr. received because it was from a blocked number.
Right.
They said, aha, it's a blocked number. That means it's a call from Moscow. And he's obviously conferring with the Russians on what to do next. In fact, it turned out after a year, which amazes me that it took them a year to track it down because the phone company could have done that much more quickly. It was discovered he was calling a family member to talk about family matters. And they just moved on. They said, well, then there must be something else. So once you live in a bubble in which you think there's a world that works under the, beneath the reality that others see, you can accept anything, or you can dismiss the absence of evidence as just the fact that these people are better at covering things up than you thought they were initially. In the Trump case, think about this. These people have to accept two things. One, that Donald Trump, as a candidate and as president, is a bumbling incompetent.
Right.
But secondly, that he is so sophisticated that he's been able to hide all of this all these years from massive investigations. I mean, it's sort of a disconnect in their mind, but if that's the way your mind works, it's not a problem.
They've also been able...
There was a Saturday Night Live routine one time with Ronald Reagan playing the dunce, and then as soon as everybody left the room, he started ordering all the stuff. It was played by Phil Hartman. It was hilarious. It's like, no, and he's doing the math in his head and everything else. Same kind of an idea.
Well, you have to remember that they thought he was
completely a nut.
Sure they did.
But one of the things is that, everybody says right now that Hillary Clinton will come in and bring the party together at the last minute, and so three times a charm. So
I suggested a couple of years ago, George, that perhaps Barack Obama and Donald Trump should get together and have a dinner honoring Hillary, because at least arguably neither one of them would have ever made it to the White House, but the fact that they got a chance to run against her.
Oh, that's cruel.
Okay, the biggest worry that I actually have, a real true worry, is the incredible voter fraud we had in this last election. Orange County with ballot harvesting. What we saw in North Carolina, they went against, the Republican to do it. But now they want to go to prisons and give people the right to vote. And, talk about a group of people that you can control as far as getting exactly the number of votes you want.
Well, George,
what do we do about this?
In every Congress, and I'll get right back to that, but in every Congress, the first bill introduced, H.R. 1, tells you what the party in power wants. So H.R. 1 has often been a tax bill, a budget bill, all of these things. In recent decades, two H.R. 1s tell you what the Democratic Party is all about. When Bill Clinton was president, the H.R. 1 the Democrats introduced when they controlled the House was for motor voting and an instant registration. Today's H.R. 1 is a blatant attempt to take over the entire electoral system, cut the states out, have instant registration for everyone, all of these things which would benefit, they believe, would benefit the Democratic Party. It's all about holding on to power. If the fact that they have, it's interesting because the Democrats and the media establishment has argued for years and years and years that there is no such thing as voter fraud. Now they're willing to make one exception, North Carolina, because that was a Republican. So in all of our history, we haven't had any voter fraud until this guy in North Carolina's son committed some. What did he do? He harvested ballots, which is illegal in North Carolina and should be illegal everywhere.
Right.
But what they're trying to do is legalizing it, and they already won something like 6 or 7 congressional seats by legalizing ballot harvesting in California. Under H.R. 1, they would legalize it everywhere. And so that if you do that, you can then control the elections, because you can show up after the polls close with 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 votes and say, well, we won this one, and that's what they did in California, as you well know.
Yep.
So I think that this has to be resisted, and it has to be resisted in Congress, and it has to be resisted in the states, because what it is an attempt to disenfranchise the other party and lock in control so that you can never lose again. Look at California. It's very difficult to imagine Republicans coming back in that state, not because there aren't any Republicans, not because of out-migration or because of new voters coming in. It's impossible or difficult to imagine it because they've changed the rules on the ground to favor the party in power.
David, how long?
Well, Georgia did this thing where if you don't vote for 3 years, you're purged from the rolls, unless you make some automatic thing. All of this was Democratic things that they put into place, and we were able to use it against the gal down in Georgia, and then she said that we basically cheated. Now, Judicial Watch is the only one out there right now suing. You just want them, in Los Angeles to remove people off the rolls. I mean, was it the Ohio special election? We had over 170 people over the age of 117, and there's nobody in the world over 116 that were listed on the rolls, and half of them voted. Just amazing.
I guess the turnout was down a little bit because of their age. But in many states, in Maryland, for example, where I live, you can't get somebody off the rolls unless you can produce a death certificate.
Wow.
I mean, they've set it up so that it is very difficult for any of this to happen. And you got to remember the old joke in Chicago when they're going through the graveyard, and the mayor says, "Well, these people have got just as much right to vote as anybody." The fact is that voter fraud does exist in this country. It is serious. Is there a place where they steal 20% of the vote? No. But most important races in this country in today's world are decided by 2 and 3%. And 2 and 3% is something that you can make up through voter fraud, and it is made up in a lot of areas in exactly that way.
David, how much longer can the media continue to hide the successes of Donald Trump? Because it doesn't get out there.
They've done a heck of a job, thus far, because of their innate hostility to the man, with over 90% of coverage being negative. He's on his way to Vietnam right now, or he's there to work on the next stage of this hoped-for deal with North Korea. If Barack Obama or Bill Clinton had been able to work out an enforceable deal to prevent a country like North Korea from going ahead with its nuclear program, there'd probably be a Nobel Peace Prize in the offing, or people talking about how great it was. In this case, all of the coverage is how these guys are going to pull the wool over Donald Trump's eyes, because we in the media know he's a dummy. And there's sort of a hope that he'll lose. Remember the coverage of the State of the Union message, which was one of the most viewed and most positively received State of the Union messages in recent years. All of the pre-message coverage was how aha, now the president's going to go on national television, fall on his face, act like a fool, and drive his numbers further down than ever.
Yeah.
Didn't happen, but they believe deep in their soul that it would.
No, but they continue to even just spin the successes as negatives.
Right, no, exactly right. I mean, the idea that, for example, they had this story that's a non-story about how, well, people are going to be really upset at the tax cut because they're going to get less in terms of refunds this year because not as much money is being withheld from them on a weekly basis. And it turned out that the Treasury study showed that was like, A, it was 2 or 3%, and secondly, that's hardly an argument against the tax cut. It's an argument that maybe taxpayers are being more diligent about to having withheld what's supposed to be withheld rather than more in a forced savings. I mean, you get everything. You try to if you're hostile, and if you're convinced that the president is not only wrong but evil, you look at everything in search of the dark side. Yeah. And that's what these folks do, so they're able to deny any success. I mean, the whole idea, and they haven't caught up, because if you listen to the rhetoric of the potential Democratic nominees, they're talking about how the economy isn't working. The economy is working. Yes. They're talking about how we got to get people back to work. You can't find anybody to fill a job in most states because there's virtual full employment. Yes. And yet they're living in a time when they're convinced that there's a real problem out there because of the Republicans.
Will Harold Schultz make a big difference in this race, or is he going to back out?
I mean, I have no idea because I don't know the man, but he is. You got to give the guy credit for having the courage to stand up and say, "You people are nuts." That's what he's doing. You know, I mean, it's pretty. The more likely impact on the race is if Michael Bloomberg gets in, because he's going to run in the Democratic Party primary. Right. Schultz is talking about running as independent, and he has said that if he runs, he's going to spend whatever it takes. And this is a guy that can spend $1 billion without even thinking about it. And indeed, just in the last off-year election, he spent over $100 million to help Democratic candidates get elected. There's an interesting thing there. There's an article the other day, George, about the fact that that Bloomberg has given to various charities, if you will, non-government organizations, advocacy groups, and the like, several $1 billion over the last few years, and that now his operatives are calling those people and saying, you know, now Mr. Bloomberg's thinking about running for president, and we want to know where you are. So, you know, think about this: if the Koch brothers, they don't have as much money as Michael Bloomberg, but if the Koch brothers went out and went to every place that they've given money for charity and started asking them to support their candidate for president, the media would be outraged. And yet, because they like Mr. Bloomberg, it's okay that he's doing this. And they pointed out in the article reporting on it that, well, they aren't really twisting arms. They're just asking where they are. Now, if you were with one of these advocacy groups and were looking at your next year's budget and knew that you got 20% of your budget last year from Michael Bloomberg, what would your answer be?
Well, I mean, nobody mentions the fact that the attorney general races that Soros backed, and now you see New York, numerous other states where the attorney generals are running completely political prosecutions. I mean, I love the gal in New York who said, well, we're going to investigate the Trump family until we find a case to go after them on.
I think she was channeling Beria.
That's completely not the way the justice system is set up.
No, it's not, but they have. This is the one thing that they have managed to do successfully, not just elect those kinds of folks to the Attorney General's office. And Attorney Generals as a class over time are tempted constantly to go after somebody because many of them are looking for higher office. But these are ideological Attorney Generals who are using the power of their office to essentially weaponize the law and go after their political enemies, and it's happening in various places around the country. New York is as outrageous as any place, of course, and they one of the things they and the governor did was they went after the National Rifle Association that I used to head, and have had the NRA in court for some months. It got so bad up there that the American Civil Liberties Union has come into the case on the side of the National Rifle Association, because as the head of the ACLU said to me, sometimes you have to do what's right, even if you don't like the people you're helping.
Well, Tom DeLay was put into bankruptcy by this. You're seeing this all over the place.
Well, and the county, but this used to be something that was isolated in a few places. Now it's sort of malignantly spreading across the country.
George, we're running out of time, my friend.
All right, well, I want to thank Donna, and it was funny to do the research and find a couple of the conspiracy theories on you, David, this week. Also, hey, I need to thank everybody for your thoughts and prayers. The heart procedure went perfectly on Friday.
That's great.
And I'm back in rhythm.
He doesn't sound any different.
Around for a while.
Before, does he?
No, it
you guys just see back.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.
My pleasure.
And
You may be right.
we'll be right back.